Nero played, so we are told, the fiddle while Rome burned. Why not play the flute today? Where Aldous Huxley and Nietzsche both went wrong, and why Dostoevsky was only half right. Aldous Huxley, well-known author of that prophecy of technocracy, titled Brave New World after Shakespeare, readily acknowledged an inadequacy in his story. He left no space for an intelligent response to technocracy. We have the crowds of lobotomized, essentially, followers of the logic of the machine. And we have the savage who fails to respond to technocracy in an intelligent way, hiding in a cave and then being turned into some kind of a zoo curiosity is not an intelligent alternative to the life of technocratic men. Huxley readily acknowledged this, and what thereafter, what alternative, what solid alternative does he offer us? Well, one might say that it is his own life. And so what we have is an author of stories that decry the mental and moral decrepitude of modern man as he advances into technocracy. And at the same time, what does this author do? Well, he seeks transcendence through drugs, LSD and whatnot. Well, this is intellectually inadequate, needless to say. So, what is the reason why Huxley cannot come up with a better alternative? And the reason may be that he ignored the second fault in his work. The diagnosis of the condition of men under technocracy is faulty. How so? Well, Nietzsche did not recognize what Aldous Huxley did not recognize. But, in fact, Dostoevsky had a better sense of what was at stake. What is happening in technocracy? Well, are we going to be simply hopping around joyfully all together and become little robots? And Dostoevsky's answer is no, absolutely not. What we are facing is the manifestation with technocracy, is the manifestation of modern reason, modern autonomous reason, that projects itself into an objective form, the technological order. And Dostoevsky sees quite well that modern autonomous reason, if left to itself, leads to inevitably to one and only one outcome: suicide. Once modern reason succeeds, so the triumph of modern reason, you could say Hegel, then modern reason is forced to face itself, its ungroundedness, its autonomy is free-floating, and it fails to account for itself. And when it does so, it seeks to destroy itself. This happened, of course, in the 20th century, but what we're having today is something more pervasive. The exercises of the 20th century were not, should we say, global. They had global aspirations, but they were not global, altogether global. What we have today is more thorough, and we can achieve vaster goals. In fact, the goal on a vaster scale, thanks to this extreme objectification of the logic of modern reason, or simply autonomous reason, in technological tools or toys. So, why would modern autonomous reason lead to suicide? And Dostoevsky's works highlight this process by which, at some point, modern reason, autonomous reason, destroys itself. It seeks specifically its own, overtly, its own destruction. Why? Well, those familiar with Dostoevsky's works should have no difficulty seeing why that is the case. Now, why would Dostoevsky's assessment of the human condition be only half right? Well, the reason is that he sees no reason that is better than instrumental reason. So he remains a modern. He treads in the shadow of Romanticism, and yes, a Christian Romanticism, but ultimately the Christian aspect is but, in fact, a means to an end, not an end in itself. So the goal is to have a universal society where everybody is loving each other, and so all of these beautiful things. The goal is of a social nature. The goal is not God. The goal is not divine intelligence. So it is not, consequently, through reason that you return to the end, or that you ascend to the end. It is through sentiment. So, sentiment is inadequate, especially in the face of technocracy or the challenges of technocracy. It just won't work. And waiting for Christ to come back as a some kind of a mythical entity is obviously not going to work to respond seriously to the challenges of technocracy. Well, there we have the problem at hand, and one might still question the tendency of modern man to commit suicide and say, well, why didn't it happen earlier? Well, the idea here is that we have to be all together in this madness. So nobody is to be left out of the ring of suicide. We can still question, you say, well, isn't there an alternative within modern reason to collective suicide? We can be instrumentalists without coming to an end. Um, and really, the alternative, any alternative of that sort, is barred by the success of the global movement. So, as long when the ideal is established, now reason has nothing to work for. This in terms of the establishment of the ideal world in which reason is God. So now autonomous reason can do whatever it wants. In principle, it can start recreating things. And now the problem is, what for? And so now it finally faces the problem. Life is meaningless. And so if life is meaningless, then life is unbearable. And we start attacking ourselves. And so we have all these small phenomena that we read about in the news, people harming themselves, castrating themselves as a sign of affirmation. This is quite intriguing. We have clinics that are calling the castration of young people, kids essentially, gender affirmation. This is an affirmation of the will to power, which is something that brings us back to Nietzsche. Nietzsche did not recognize that the will to power leads to madness. Of course, Nietzsche himself went mad. And it's not accidental. It's not just a chemical imbalance in him. Nietzsche went mad because modern reason, essentially, he came to the full circle, the full circle of modern autonomous reason. He saw that the Hegelian triumph of reason is not adequately understood as a triumph of reason. It is a triumph of the will to power. And the problem is that once you face that will to power, you could say, well, you could follow Nietzsche's promise and say, well, that you're going to be a superstar or a superman or an overman, and so be a mouthpiece of fate, essentially. But this is not what happens. This is not what happens to Nietzsche. You say, well, Nietzsche was a prophet and he wasn't the philosopher of the future. No. He saw what the philosopher of the future would be. And he went mad. Just as the philosopher of the future goes mad. Because this abyss that tells us to express it, right, to be carriers of the will to power, may very well, and at any moment, may very well tell us to destroy ourselves. In other words, it might tell us that life itself is affirmation through self-destruction. And this is what we have today. We start seeing more and more signs of this. The affirmation of life as freedom demands the destruction of life. So we have it through the wars, we seek wars. It's not that we find them necessary, accidentally for defense purposes or because we want to conquer somebody else. No. It's a necessity ingrained in the autonomy of modern reason. They say, well, economics, the marketplace will, market relationships, the global market will settle the problem of war. Absolutely not. The greatest trade is that of weapons. So war is big business. So no, war is absolutely of the essence for modern reason. Indeed, ever since Machiavelli, evil is a necessity to establish the good. It's not a necessity that is accidental. It's there. What are you going to do with it? No. You need it. You have to recruit evil to establish the good. And of course, Dostoevsky saw that there was something ridiculous about this. He says, well, everybody who wants to establish this ideal world must face at some point or another a moment where he needs to adopt evil measures to achieve his goal. And so Dostoevsky says, well, the alternative is not that of the classics, classic rationalism. The alternative is essentially this sentiment that opens up to God's intervention, this Holy Spirit that will establish from the bottom of our hearts the essentially a global peace and society. That's not something that's happening, and it did not happen for Russia, for one thing. We had, instead of having that, we had in response to modern rationalism, we had communism. So that doesn't work. Right. So what do we have with Nietzsche? We have this falling prey to his own realization. The will to power means, well, it comes to tell you, destroy yourself. And this brings us back to a call that we find in the Bible. It is the call of the absolute that addresses Abraham. It tells Abraham how to live, what to do. And Abraham is entirely trusting. He trusts God immediately and unconditionally. That's good. I mean, that is a biblical message that is, one could say, is the pillar of the Bible, of biblical life. But Abraham, in trusting God, listens to, or hears rather, God's will. And he doesn't know why God is willing whatever he believes, whatever Abraham believes he is willing. It is not in the element of an angel, in other words, of logos, of a discourse. And angels, we know in the Bible, people can argue with them, can wrestle with them. Yes? It is not in the element of the angel that God speaks to Abraham, telling him to sacrifice, to kill his own son. It is in the element of the angel, however, reason, that God speaks to Abraham, telling him to stop. This evokes for us, who can evoke the Socratic appeal to, a daimonium, a kind of spirit, a rational spirit that stops Socrates every time he's about to do something stupid. This is absent from Aldous Huxley. This is absent from Nietzsche. So Nietzsche appeals to, ultimately, to truth. He rejects truth in the vulgar sense, but then there's a higher truth. But when he gets back to truth, after having destroyed old truth, the conventional truth, he is incapable of facing truth in a rational way. So he is listening to God now, but not through the angel. So there is no rational communication between God and man. And this is the, you could say, the tragedy of modern man. And this is also where Dostoevsky himself fails.